Have you guys ever gotten your psychology paper and just are staring at the ceiling because you don't know how to answer questions like these? If this is you, then I would recommend watching this entire video. Today we'll be going over some psychology paper 1 questions and how to answer them. Before we start learning how to answer these questions, it is important that you familiarize yourself with the command terms used in the questions. The most common command terms include explain, evaluate, discuss, and describe. I will also be putting the rest of the command terms in the description below so you could just check them out over there. Explain refers to giving a detailed account including the reasons and the causes. So for example, if you were asked to explain the biological explanation behind neuroplasticity, you would describe factors such as the neural networks of the brain and synaptic plasticity, while referencing to and thoroughly explaining studies such as McGuire et al. 2000, as this supports the idea of neuroplasticity. Next, we have evaluate. This refers to making claims using both strengths and limitations. So for instance, if we were evaluating MRI and studying the brain, you could talk about its advantages such as creating detailed images of brain activity while also mentioning its limitations, for example the high cost, and make sure to support the evaluation using relevant case studies. Now next we have discuss. This refers to offering a considered and balanced review that includes a range of arguments, factors, or hypotheses. Opinions or conclusions should be clearly presented and supported by evidence. So for example, if you were asked to discuss ethical considerations related to research studies, you would discuss the protection of participants from ethical considerations such as harm and consent, while referring to relevant case studies to support your discussion. Lastly, we have describe, which is to give a detailed account. For example, if you were asked to describe the effects of cognitive dissonance on attitudes and beliefs, you would mention how cognitive dissonance may cause a person to change their behavior to align with their beliefs, and make sure to use relevant case studies to support your claims. Now in paper 1, there are 2 types of questions, the 9-mark questions and the 22-mark questions. Let's take a look at how to answer the 9-mark questions first. So let's say that this is the question. It is asking us to describe the localization of function with reference to one relevant study. So the first thing we need to understand is the length of your response. Typically for a 9-mark question, you should try to aim for 1 to 2 pages, which is around 600 to 900 words, and bifurcate this answer into an introduction, body paragraphs, conclusion, and then the connection to the real world. Now we can talk about what you should incorporate into each component of your answer. The question is asking us about the localization of function, so it is absolutely essential that you include a brief 3 to 4 sentence synopsis on what localization of function is. Now the second part of your introduction must include the name of the case study that you have selected, along with the name of the researchers and the date that this was conducted. And then connect this study to the localization of function while explaining how the selected study helps support the concept. Now the body paragraphs are quite simple. There are 2 main things that you need to do. First, you need to thoroughly explain the case study that you have selected by including the aim of the experiment, the participants involved, the method used, the procedure of the experiment, and the results in the conclusion. The second part is optional, but I would recommend it as it would strengthen your answer a lot. After you have finished explaining the study, you could choose to also explain any theories which are connected to this study or any graphs that are involved by creating those and sketching them as well. In the conclusion, there is one thing that you must do, and that is to clearly correlate how the relevant study that you have chosen helped to successfully answer the question and effectively showcase the concept that was given in the question. The real-world connection is an extremely important part of your answer, as this carries around 1 to 2 marks. In this part of the answer, you should state and explain how the findings of the chosen case study help society outside of the field of psychology and the impact that this created on the real world. And this is just a reminder that without properly learning and understanding the case studies, none of this is going to matter. So it is important that you study the case studies and then apply this structure to enhance your overall writing. Now let's take a look at this 22-mark question. It is asking us to evaluate one or more research methods used to study the interaction between technology and cognitive processes. The command term used over here is evaluate, so we already know that we must make claims while including the strengths and limitations of the methods used. Now the structure of a 9-mark question and 22-mark question is quite similar. However, there are just some few extra steps in the 22-mark question. The typical length of a 22-mark question should be around 3 pages. The minimum word limit is 1,000 words, and an averagely good answer is usually around 1,400 to 1,900 words. For the introduction in a 22-mark question, again, you must give a brief synopsis on what the concept asked in the question is. So for example, over here you would give a 3 to 4 sentence brief of what research methods in psychology are. And then, the second part of your introduction must include the names of the case studies that we have selected, and this time we need to discuss at least 2 to 3 as this is a 22-mark question, and then the year that these case studies were conducted. The structure of the body paragraphs is again the same. However, before you start explaining your selected study, you should try to give a brief overview of the method used in the experiment, and constantly try to connect back to the question in order to show that you're not losing focus. Now, you should thoroughly evaluate the selected case studies by explaining the aim of the experiment, the participants involved, and this time you should put heavy emphasis on the methods used, then the procedure of the experiment, and then the results and the conclusion. For the conclusion, you must show how this selected case study, along with your response, directly answered the question. And for this particular question, you should also show how it was able to demonstrate the impact the method used had on the outcome. There is one more step in the conclusion. After discussing all your selected case studies, you should try to discuss and evaluate the individual impact that each case study had in answering the question. So for example, you should try to dedicate one paragraph to comparing and contrasting between an independent measures design experiment and a repeated measures design experiment. The real-world implications are quite self-explanatory. Discuss about the impact that each of these selected case studies had on fields outside of psychology. So that was basically my retrospective on the ideal way to answer a 9-mark question and 22-mark question. You should use this as a guide and try to find what works for you. If this video helped you out, please make sure to share this video and also make sure to subscribe.